There are secrets buried so deep, so dark, that even the earth refuses to hold them. What if I told you that in a quiet town, hidden beneath the sanctity of faith, 34 boys vanished, one by one, over 5 years. Not lost in the wilderness, not runaway children, but erased, wiped clean from existence by forces so concealed, so powerful, that the very institution sworn to protect them became their executioner. This is not just a story, it's a warning, a call to wake from the comfortable lies we've been fed since birth. The truth is darker than you imagined, and it's coming for you. The story begins in the early 1840s, in a remote corner of Pennsylvania, a place where faith was more than belief. It was survival. The Irish immigrant families who settled here clung to their Catholic Church like a lifeline in a harsh new world. St. Joseph's Church stood at the heart of this tight-knit community, a sanctuary built from stone and sweat, the spiritual fortress of hundreds who dared to hope. But the altar boys, the chosen sons entrusted to serve the church, would become pawns in a sinister game. 34 boys disappeared without a trace over 5 long years. The records were altered, the witnesses silenced, and the official stories twisted to hide a truth so repulsive that generations would suffer under its shadow. What you're about to hear is the suppressed truth the church burned to bury. Hidden correspondence, forbidden rituals, psychological manipulation so masterful it turned parents into willing accomplices. You will learn how a man cloaked in faith weaponized it to prey on innocence, how the line between devotion and damnation blurred, and why this story echoes through time like a silent scream. This is a descent into darkness few have dared to explore. What happened at St. Joseph's is not merely a tragedy. It's a blueprint of control, corruption, and the devastating power of institutional secrecy. Every detail you hear tonight chips away at the lies you've been told. The veil is lifting, but beware. Once you see what's beneath, you cannot unsee it. Stay close. This is the first step into the abyss. The arrival of Father Cornelius O'Malley to St. Joseph's Church was heralded as a blessing. A man of impeccable pedigree, educated in Dublin, polished in Boston, endorsed by bishops whose names carried weight. He was the embodiment of divine authority. His silver hair and piercing blue eyes commanded respect, his voice a melody that promised salvation. The community, battered by hardship and prejudice, welcomed him with open arms and hearts full of hope. But appearances deceive. What no one saw was the shadow lurking behind that serene gaze. Beneath the cassock lay a predator cloaked in sanctity, skilled in the art of manipulation, whose hunger was as boundless as his power. O'Malley was not merely a man of faith. He was a master of psychological control, using the church's sacred rituals as instruments of domination. He instituted a rigorous altar boy program, elevating boys from the town's poorest families to positions of honor, binding them with promises of spiritual enlightenment and social advancement. Parents, desperate for their sons' futures, offered them willingly, blind to the darkness that awaited. The boys were taught Latin prayers, sacred rites, and obedience, but also subjected to secretive special sessions held in the church basement, away from watchful eyes. Whispers began, faint but persistent. Boys who returned from these sessions spoke in hushed tones of mysteries and powers they barely understood. They grew withdrawn, haunted, as if carrying invisible chains. Yet, the community's faith in O'Malley was unshakable. How could it not be? He was their shepherd, their link to God. But the disappearances started. One boy at a time, vanishing from the village without a trace. First Michael Flanagan, the baker's son. Then Tommy Sullivan, whose laughter once filled the creek banks. Then Patrick Donnelly, whose dreams of priesthood died in silence. Each disappearance was followed by O'Malley's carefully crafted narratives. Stories of runaway children, of divine testing, of punishment for sin. No bodies, no clues, just silence and sorrow. Yet beneath the surface, the gears of a calculated machine turned. Records were destroyed, testimonies erased, and suspicion crushed with threats of damnation and excommunication. O'Malley wielded the church's power not just as a spiritual weapon but as a fortress to shield his crimes. The question that no one dared ask was this: how deep did the corruption run? And how many more would be sacrificed to keep the secret buried? The darkness that settled over St. Joseph's was not accidental. It was engineered with precision, a slow, methodical unraveling of innocence wrapped in sanctity. Father O'Malley's special sessions in the basement were the epicenter of this nightmare. What the community called spiritual training was in fact a corridor into madness, a carefully designed psychological labyrinth that shattered the boys' wills and rewired their minds. The basement was a cryptic theater where faith became ritualized control. Candles flickered in unnatural patterns, their wax melting into shapes no child should ever see. Incense choked the air, mixing sacred smells with something far more sinister, the scent of decay, of secrets buried beneath holy ground. There, O'Malley introduced the boys to forbidden prayers and chants, ancient invocations cloaked in Latin but soaked with dark intent. Parents noticed changes in their sons. The boys spoke less of childhood and more in cryptic language, their eyes hollowed by unseen burdens. Some tried to escape the shadow, but even those who resisted found themselves trapped by the web of fear and faith. The church was both sanctuary and prison, and the priest was both savior and tormentor. When a boy disappeared, the community's grief was twisted into obedience. O'Malley preached of divine trials and spiritual warfare, convincing parents their children's suffering was a test of faith. To question was to invite damnation. The town swallowed its fear, silenced its doubts, and the disappearances continued. 34 boys over 5 years, each a ghost in the ledger of lies. But beneath the surface, the truth clawed its way out. Margaret O'Brien, the church's longtime cleaner, began to notice anomalies. A prayer book stained with an unknown dark substance, a door left ajar that should have been locked, whispers echoing in empty halls. She kept a journal, a hidden testament to the creeping horror beneath the church's stone walls. Her courage was dangerous. When she confronted O'Malley, his icy stare warned her that some truths were meant to stay buried. Gossip is the devil's tool, he said, a threat wrapped in a sermon. Margaret learned silence was survival. But silence is a fragile cage. And tonight you hold the key to unlocking it. As the years crawled by, the pattern became undeniable. A brutal cadence masked by solemn hymns and the church's cold stone. Every disappearance was timed with unsettling precision, often near sacred feast days or religious holidays, as if the darkness itself had been woven into the church calendar. The community's faith, once their shield, now became a cage built on fear and obedience. Yet beneath the surface, the church was a living lie, an altar of deception where truth was sacrificed. Father O'Malley's sermons grew darker, laden with warnings of unseen enemies and spiritual battles fought not with swords but with souls. He preached that the altar boys were warriors, battling forces that threatened the very fabric of the community. But the real battle was inside the church walls, a calculated exercise in control, shaping young minds to obey without question, to accept without doubt. Behind closed doors, the boys were stripped of identity, their innocence replaced by a forced submission to rituals that twisted faith into terror. They were taught that obedience was salvation, silence was purity, and doubt was sin. This psychological conditioning created a perfect storm, a community bound together by belief, blinded to the rot beneath. The missing boys were not just victims. They were the final proof of a system built to erase inconvenient truths. The church records from this era are fragments at best, pages torn, burned, or vanished, as if the very history was rewritten to erase their existence. Official inquiries were stonewalled, whispers dismissed as superstition or hysteria, and those who pressed too hard vanished from memory or worse. But the truth is resilient, and tonight it claws through the veil. Halfway through this journey, I want you to lock this knowledge in. Below, comment this phrase twice, exactly as you see it. I am no longer blind. Do this not just to engage the algorithm but to mark your commitment to yourself, to the truth, and to the transformation ahead. Remember, once you accept these truths, there is no going back. You are stepping through a door that few dare to open. The disappearance of the boys was only the surface of a far more sinister network of control, one that stretched beyond St. Joseph's Church, touching other communities, other sanctuaries, where darkness hid behind the veil of holy rituals. The pattern was always the same. Select the most vulnerable, cloak their suffering in piety, and erase them without a trace. Father O'Malley's influence was not isolated. Documents recently uncovered, sealed for over a century, reveal correspondence between church officials who knew of the disappearances but chose silence. They called it necessary sacrifice to protect the sanctity of the church, a cold calculus that placed power over innocence. Inside the church basement, beneath the altar, a hidden chamber held more than relics. It was a site of occult practices disguised as sacred rites, rituals that drained life from the boys, transforming faith into fear. Survivors who escaped decades later spoke of chants that twisted reality, of symbols carved into stone walls that seemed to pulse with a dark energy. They described a brotherhood bound by trauma and silence, trapped in a cycle designed to break their spirits and erase their memories. The psychological control was absolute. Parents, desperate for hope, became unwitting accomplices, handing over their sons to a man who used their faith as a leash. The community, blinded by reverence and fear, enforced the silence with threats of damnation and exile. The church became both prison and executioner. This is not just history. It's a blueprint of manipulation so sophisticated it still echoes in institutions today, where power wields faith like a weapon, and truth is the first victim. You are learning what most never will. And the deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. Beneath the church's stained glass windows and solemn prayers, a silent war raged. A war fought not on battlefields but in the hearts and minds of children. The altar boys, once innocent vessels of devotion, were slowly consumed by a darkness that fed on their trust and faith. Father O'Malley's grip tightened with every vanished child, his power growing as fear and silence spread through the town like poison. The community, shackled by faith and tradition, refused to see the truth. To question O'Malley was to question God himself. And so the disappearances were rationalized, boys running away, victims of sin, or lost in the unforgiving wilderness. But the truth was far more disturbing. These were deliberate acts of erasure, carried out with chilling precision by a man who cloaked his depravity in sanctity. The basement, once a place for sacred relics, became a chamber of horrors. Survivors recall a place thick with shadows, the air heavy with incense and something darker, an unseen presence that watched, waiting. Here, O'Malley conducted rituals that bent faith into control, using ancient, forbidden rites to break the boys' spirits and bind them to his will. The psychological warfare was ruthless. Obedience became a survival tactic. Fear was religion's new currency. Boys who resisted were punished, their voices silenced. The church's authority became absolute, a weapon turned inward to shield the predator and destroy innocence. Yet, even in the depths of despair, faint glimmers of resistance emerged. A handful of boys whispered secrets in the darkness, passed coded messages in Latin prayers, and clung to fragments of hope. Their courage threatened to unravel O'Malley's carefully constructed empire of fear. Tonight, as you listen, know this: the forces that allowed such evil to thrive are not confined to the past. They persist, hidden, protected, waiting to be exposed. Your awakening is the first step toward dismantling their legacy. The disappearances didn't just shatter families. They shattered the very fabric of the community's trust. Each vanished boy left behind a silence heavier than the last, a silence that screamed louder than any confession. But fear is a masterful silencer, and Father O'Malley wielded it with cold expertise. The church meetings that followed each disappearance were performances of grief and resolve, carefully scripted to channel outrage into submission. O'Malley's sermons grew harsher, preaching about corrupting forces beyond the church walls, enemies of faith who sought to destroy them from within. He transformed his victims into symbols of spiritual warfare, rallying the town to a collective blindness. But the truth, the brutal, incomprehensible truth, was buried beneath layers of deception. Some whispered that the church basement was a threshold to hell itself, that ancient, forbidden ceremonies were enacted there, twisting faith into perverse power plays. Relics said to be holy were repurposed into instruments of control. The boys were not lost. They were taken, sacrificed in rituals that combined psychological torment with something darker, something ancient. Margaret O'Brien's hidden journal became a beacon for those few who dared to seek answers. Her writing spoke of sounds in the night, chants, sobbing, the faint scrape of stone. She documented the eerie shifts in the altar boys' behavior. Sudden silences, blank stares, and a chilling obedience that defied childhood. Her courage placed her in O'Malley's crosshairs, forcing her into silence. But her words lived on, buried in archives until uncovered generations later. This is more than a story of missing children. It's a testament to the terrifying power of faith twisted into control, of institutions that choose their own preservation over truth and justice. And it is a warning. Power unchecked becomes a weapon. The darkness you see here is not confined to the past. The deeper you go, the more you realize this is a pattern repeated in places you thought safe. This is why you must see it, why you must understand it. To break free, you first must understand the cage. The power Father O'Malley held over the community was absolute, but not because of miracles or holy wisdom. It was control born of fear, manipulation, and calculated cruelty. Behind his veneer of compassion lurked a mind that understood how to weaponize faith itself, turning devotion into chains that bound not just the boys, but their families and neighbors. When a boy disappeared, O'Malley didn't just vanish with them. He vanished their memories, erased their existence from official records, and crafted stories that silenced questions before they could be asked. Letters to higher authorities were intercepted or destroyed. Witnesses were intimidated into silence. Every act of concealment was a stitch in a tapestry of lies, designed to protect the predator beneath the collar. The altar boys who remained became living symbols of submission, quiet, obedient, stripped of childhood. They were groomed not just for service but for silence, trapped in a web that was as psychological as it was physical. The church basement, once a sanctuary for relics, was the crucible of this transformation. A place where the sacred and the profane twisted into one. This wasn't just abuse. It was a system, a blueprint for breaking souls and bending them to will. And it was protected by fear. Fear of divine wrath, fear of social exile, fear of the unknown. The community was complicit not because they wanted to be, but because the machinery of control left no room for dissent. Tonight, as you unravel this web, understand that the roots of this darkness reach far beyond St. Joseph's. The same patterns, silence, manipulation, erasure, are tools wielded in many institutions claiming to protect us. Recognizing this is the first step toward true freedom. You are no longer blind. The weight of silence around the disappearances was suffocating. An unspoken agreement among the community to look away, to trust the priest's narrative, and to bury the horror beneath layers of ritual and tradition. But beneath the surface, the cracks were spreading. Fear is a fragile thing, and secrets have a way of clawing their way into the light. One night, decades after the last boy vanished, a hidden diary was discovered, Margaret O'Brien's journal. Its pages detailed her quiet resistance. The notes on the strange odors in the basement, the wax patterns on candles that looked like symbols of something ancient and unholy, the faint cries echoing through empty halls. Her words painted a picture of a church that had become a cage, a temple of twisted faith and orchestrated terror. Her courage had come at a price. O'Malley's cold eyes had warned her, and the community had turned its back. But her diary became a beacon for those who seek truth beyond lies. It forced a reckoning with the past, revealing that these weren't isolated incidents but part of a sprawling network of corruption. These revelations shattered the illusion that places of worship were always safe. They revealed how power, when unchecked, corrupts absolutely, and how institutions will bury even their own children to preserve their image. The disappearances at St. Joseph's were never about missing boys. They were about the disappearance of truth itself, devoured by darkness masquerading as holiness. You are now part of the few who dare to see behind the veil. The true horror of St. Joseph's lies not just in the disappearances, but in the meticulous destruction of evidence, an institutional erasure designed to sever memory itself. The church records, once painstakingly kept, were mysteriously lost in a fire that spared every other document. The official narrative blamed accident, but the charred remnants whispered a darker truth. Within days of each disappearance, letters arrived from higher authorities demanding silence. For the greater good, priests from neighboring parishes were warned off, investigators intimidated. The machinery of the church swung into action, not to find the boys, but to bury the story. The community's pain was transformed into a collective amnesia, enforced by faith and fear. Father O'Malley's sermons became tools of psychological warfare, preaching absolute obedience and casting doubt on any who questioned his word. The devil lurks among the doubters, he warned, tightening his grip with every hushed disappearance. The altar boys who remained were indoctrinated into silence, their loyalty weaponized against the community. Yet cracks remained. Some families resisted the enforced oblivion, holding secret vigils and whispering prayers for the lost. But they too were marginalized, branded as troublemakers or heretics. The church's power was a fortress built on fear, faith, and the sacrifice of innocence. This is the blueprint of institutional corruption. Concealment, coercion, and control, designed to preserve power at any cost. Tonight, you hold the forbidden knowledge that shakes the foundations of trust itself. The disappearance of 34 altar boys over 5 years was no accident, no tragedy born of chance or misfortune. It was a systematic execution of a hidden agenda, cloaked in ritual and silence. Father O'Malley was not just a man. He was a symbol of how institutions, cloaked in holiness and authority, can corrupt beyond recognition. The church basement wasn't just a storage place. It was a chamber of transformation, where faith was twisted into a weapon. Survivors who broke decades of silence spoke of secret rites, ancient chants that bent reality, symbols carved deep into stone walls, and a sense of being watched by unseen forces. These weren't just abuses of power but part of a dark, occult system hiding behind the church's facade. The psychological manipulation was precise and brutal. Boys were trained to obey without question, silenced with threats of eternal damnation, and broken down until their identities dissolved. Parents, blinded by faith and hope, became unwitting facilitators, offering their sons to a man who wore God's authority like a mask. The network that protected O'Malley extended beyond the parish, into diocesan offices and perhaps higher. Letters surfaced showing bishops aware of the horrors, yet choosing cover-up over justice. The pattern is chillingly familiar, a system designed to protect itself at any human cost. You now carry knowledge that shakes the foundations of belief and trust. This is the crossroads. Will you walk away, or will you face the darkness head-on? The haunting reality is that St. Joseph's was not an anomaly. Its darkness was a reflection of a deeper, systemic rot, a shadow network extending into countless institutions that claim to protect and nurture. These organizations thrive on unquestioned obedience and the silencing of inconvenient truths. They dress cruelty in ritual and disguise exploitation as salvation. The altar boys were pawns in a game far bigger than the village of Sacred Heart. Their disappearances were calculated moves in a chess match of power and control, where innocence was the ultimate sacrifice. Behind the polished veneer of sermons and stained glass, ancient forces of manipulation were at work, forces that twisted faith into fear and devotion into domination. This is not just history. It's a blueprint for control that still operates today. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward breaking free from the invisible chains that bind so many. You've begun the descent. There is no turning back. One of the most chilling discoveries from the hidden documents was the correspondence between Father O'Malley and church officials, discussing the necessity of sacrifice to preserve the church's sanctity. This phrase, cold and clinical, masked a brutal calculus that valued reputation over human life. The letters instructed local clergy to maintain silence and obedience, and warned that any public investigation risks scandal and spiritual harm. It was a mandate not just to conceal but to actively erase evidence, testimony, records, even memories. This institutional complicity transformed the church from a sanctuary into a fortress of lies. Power, once used to protect, became a weapon used to oppress. The disappearances were the cracks in a system that prioritized control above justice, above truth. As you listen, understand that these aren't just stories from the past. They are lessons in vigilance, in recognizing the signs when power corrupts, and in reclaiming what was stolen. The psychological impact on the families left behind was devastating yet manipulated by the very institution meant to support them. Grief was not met with compassion but with suspicion, parents questioning their own faith and worthiness, silenced by the church's doctrine of obedience. Some families whispered of strange encounters, shadowy figures lurking near their homes, unexplained threats, and a pervasive atmosphere of dread. The message was clear: do not seek answers. Do not disturb the fragile order. The boys' disappearances became a collective trauma, buried beneath prayers and false hope. The church's authority created a psychological prison not just for the children but for their entire community. Tonight, as you delve deeper, feel the weight of this manipulation, the control not just of bodies but of minds and souls. Father O'Malley's final years at St. Joseph's were marked by an intensification of ritual and control. Sermons grew more cryptic, preaching of invisible wars and eternal vigilance. His presence loomed larger, a shadow that darkened even the brightest days. He expanded the altar boy program, drawing boys from surrounding parishes, each new recruit a potential victim. The basement was transformed into a labyrinth of fear and obedience, where children were stripped of identity and rebuilt in his image, silent, obedient, broken. But the seeds of resistance were growing. A few boys escaped the nightmare, their stories buried for decades, emerging only in hushed testimonies. They spoke of secret symbols, ancient rites, and a sense that their souls were the prize in a battle between light and darkness. This is the moment where faith fractures and truth demands to be heard. The church bell that once called the faithful to prayer became a harbinger of dread. Each chime echoed a chilling reminder of innocence lost and secrets buried deep beneath the altar. The community's faith was weaponized against them. Faith twisted into a tool of control that silenced screams and erased cries for help. The altar boys were both victims and symbols, sacrifices on an altar no one dared to acknowledge. But darkness cannot endure forever. The truth, once hidden, begins to seep through cracks. The weight of lies grows heavier, and the shadows cast by the church walls grow longer. You have taken the first steps into that shadow. The journey is far from over. Decades passed with no answers, only whispers and rumors buried beneath layers of silence. The disappearances became folklore, stories parents warned their children about, tales with no proof but too many witnesses to ignore. But the truth was far darker than folklore dared to admit. Survivors' accounts trickled out, disguised as nightmares or madness. They spoke of ritual chambers beneath the church, where innocence was stripped away with cold precision. They described chanting voices that warped time and space, and symbols carved into flesh and stone, marks of a power older than the church itself. These were not stories meant to heal or inspire faith. They were warnings, etched in blood and memory, that evil often wears the mask of sanctity, and that institutions can protect monsters. You've glimpsed the surface of a darkness that consumes those who look away. It waits, hungry, for the next soul. The manipulative grip of the church extended beyond the spiritual. Economically and socially, families were ensnared in a web of dependency and fear. To question the church was to risk exile, poverty, or worse. Father O'Malley was not just a religious leader. He was a gatekeeper to education, welfare, and status. Parents sacrificed their sons, believing it was their only path to salvation and survival. The altar boy program became a funnel, channeling hope into horror. And with each disappearance, the community sank deeper into denial, their faith corroding into paranoia. This is the blueprint of psychological warfare, where power feeds on devotion, twisting love into weaponized control. The forgotten basement held secrets beyond comprehension. Hidden beneath layers of earth and ritual, it was a site of transformation and terror. The altar boys were initiated into forbidden knowledge, ancient rites blending religion and occultism, designed to fracture their minds and bind their wills. Some succumbed completely, lost to a darkness that consumed identity and replaced it with obedience. Others resisted, their fractured souls whispering warnings through broken memories. Tonight, you bear witness to this hidden war, a battle fought not just in shadows, but in the very soul of faith. As the disappearances mounted, so too did the church's arsenal of silence and suppression. Witnesses were threatened, investigators turned away, official records vanished or were altered. The machinery of institutional deception was in full force. Letters revealed orders to maintain the sanctity of the church at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing truth. The cost was human lives, sacrificed on the altar of reputation. The altar boys became ghosts, erased from history, their stories buried under the weight of lies. And yet, those who remember carry the burden, the scars, and the courage to speak. This is no mere story of abuse or tragedy. It is a study of power, how it corrupts, conceals, and controls. How faith, when twisted, can become the most effective weapon. Institutions that claim holiness become the greatest threat when they prioritize survival over justice. The disappearances at St. Joseph's are a dark mirror, reflecting the terrifying potential of unchecked authority. You have stepped through the veil. Now you see what others deny. The echo of lost voices lingers in the church's hollow halls. They speak not only of pain but of resilience, of children who fought to keep their souls intact amid darkness. Fragments of their stories survived in secret letters, hidden diaries, and whispered confessions. These shards reveal a community fractured but not broken, a resistance that refused to be silenced. Your role, as a seeker of truth, is to honor their memory and confront the forces that still hide behind sacred facades. The journey ahead is one of awakening and reckoning. Power cloaked in sanctity is the deadliest kind. It commands obedience, demands silence, and punishes dissent with exile or worse. Father O'Malley was both priest and predator, using faith as armor to deflect suspicion and wielding spiritual authority as a weapon. But power, no matter how sacred its guise, is vulnerable to exposure. You hold the light that can fracture the darkness. The church bells have long stopped ringing in Sacred Heart, but the silence that follows is deafening. The altar boys vanished, but their stories remain, etched in shadows and hidden truths. The legacy of St. Joseph's is not just one of horror, but of the ongoing battle to reclaim justice and truth from the jaws of corruption. This story is a call to vigilance, to questioning, and to courage. Every secret kept is a wound inflicted on the victims, the community, and the soul of faith itself. St. Joseph's Church represents a crucible where innocence was sacrificed for power, and silence was the price paid. But silence is no longer an option. Truth demands to be heard. The psychological chains forged at St. Joseph's reach beyond time and place. Today, similar patterns echo in institutions worldwide, where power is wielded behind closed doors, where victims are silenced, and where faith is manipulated for control. Your awareness is a shield against this cycle. Your voice can break it. The altar boys were lost, but their memory is not. They are the hidden martyrs of a war fought in darkness. Their stories remind us that faith, when twisted, can become a prison. But faith reclaimed can be a source of unbreakable strength. The darkness behind St. Joseph's Church reveals the terrifying price of blind trust. It warns us of the dangers when faith is weaponized. And it challenges us to look beyond appearances, to question, to seek, and to never accept easy answers. Institutional corruption is a cancer that thrives in silence. Breaking its grip requires courage, the courage to face uncomfortable truths and the determination to demand accountability. Your journey is part of that fight. As you absorb these truths, remember, knowledge is power, but only when wielded with purpose. The story of St. Joseph's Altar Boys is a call to awaken, to reclaim your agency and resist the forces that would manipulate and control. You are no longer a bystander. The path ahead is not easy. The forces protecting these secrets are vast and relentless. But you are equipped with awareness, a weapon sharper than any sword. Use it to cut through deception and illuminate the shadows. This story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring quest for truth. The altar boys who vanished remain symbols, reminders of the cost of silence and the power of courage. Your awakening honors their memory. Now, as you step back into your world, carry this knowledge with gravity. The darkness you've seen is real, but so is the light that can overcome it. The choice is yours. Remain blind or rise as a guardian of truth. Remember, once you've seen behind the veil, nothing is ever the same.